Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing really well. I am currently in Italy because I've been on a book tour because there was an Italian translation of my first book, This is Vegan Propaganda, that was recently published here. And so the tour has been amazing. It's just finished, but it's been really wonderful. And I've met so many incredible people. So thank you to everyone who came to one of the events in the cities where I've been. It's just been such a wonderful thing. And I've met so many amazing people, so kind, so generous. But I've also had lots of conversations with people throughout this book tour and have spoken to a lot of people who have told me very moving and profound and inspiring stories. And these stories and the questions I've been asked, they really got me thinking, and they got me thinking about the vegan experience and what it's like to be a vegan and what it's like to exist as a vegan in a non-vegan world, and some of the challenges and trials and hardships that we face. And I suppose it's kind of funny, really, because when people aren't vegan, or maybe when they're hearing about a vegan, or their son or daughter or friend has gone vegan, they have this idea that the difficulties around veganism will center around things like getting enough vitamin B12 or getting enough protein or finding vegan food in a supermarket or a restaurant. And that's really not the case. That's not the hardship that we find most overwhelming. Far from it. Of course, it's easy to get the nutrition we need, and there's so many great products everywhere now, and it's easy to find fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes everywhere you go. So those aren't the difficulties that we face. I saw this video quite recently. I shared it on my Instagram, and it's of this GB News presenter in the UK. GB News is like a news organisation in the UK, and it's of this member of parliament, this elected official called Lee Anderson, and it's this really unusual video. It's equal parts hilarious and frightening at the same time. And basically he discusses how his son went to university. He comes back from university a changed person. You know, he doesn't quite look the same. He's acting slightly differently, and his son tells him that he's gone vegetarian. And I thought, that's so funny. Frightening because this man is so outdated in his views, but so funny because we view these shifts as being like so life-altering. And of course they are, but what I think is interesting about that video, and I suppose maybe what I want to talk about today, is that relationship between sort of parents and children when we make the change. Obviously, to this father, his son just going vegetarian is this huge ordeal and this big thing that he's actually kind of concerned about. And so going from kind of that relationship, I suppose, it's got me thinking a little bit about the relationship with my parents and probably what they thought a vegan was, 9 years ago or so when I first told them that I'd gone vegan. And I think back then the idea of a vegan was someone who, struggled to find food and actually probably struggled to find good kind of toiletries, healthcare products and deodorant. And actually, just on the point of vegan deodorant, before we dive into the more complex conversation here around these relationships and how they change and evolve and how the difficulties around a plant-based lifestyle and veganism are not really necessarily what people who aren't vegan presume they will be. I just want to talk a little bit more about vegan deodorant, because for those of you who have seen previous videos of mine, then you may well already know that I'm a huge fan of Wild deodorant and also Wild body washes, and I'm very happy to say that Wild have partnered up with me for this video. Now, the reason that I love Wild is because Wild products are vegan, cruelty-free, and they also use compostable bamboo refills, which means that using Wild products is actually a really easy way to reduce single-use plastic as well. Now, I've actually been using Wild products for years now, and I really like them. I use them every single day. And importantly, Wild deodorant actually works. The scents smell great, and it lasts all day too. And as well as being effective, good for animals, and better for the planet, Wild uses safe ingredients that are gentle on our skin. And speaking of the scents, well, Wild have 3 new energizing scents which are perfect for that transition into warmer weather, and those scents are Rainforest Oasis, which I think is just wonderful, Pink Grapefruit and Lime, and Elderflower and Watermelon Spritz. Excitingly, Wild are also offering 20% off all of their products when you guys use the code EDAPRIL. You can also click the link in my description or scan the QR code now too. review, and you'll also get that 20% off. And Wild also offer worldwide shipping, which means that you can use this code wherever you are. So a huge thank you to Wild for partnering with me on this video, and also a huge thank you for creating vegan deodorant that smells great and actually works. So we've established that you can get vegan toiletries and smell great as a vegan, that you can eat delicious food as a vegan, and you can get the nutrition that you need as a vegan as well. And so if we tick all of these boxes, even though these are really the things that most non-vegans think that vegans are actually going to struggle with the most, the question then becomes, what do we struggle with the most? What is the hardest challenge or challenges that we face as vegans? Now, as I just mentioned at the beginning of this video, I've been on this book tour, and I've had the opportunity and the privilege to be able to speak to lots and lots of vegans. And one of the things that I find most interesting and potentially also most upsetting is whether I'm in the UK, the US, Italy, wherever it might be, when I speak to vegans, it's the same kind of concerns or challenges or questions that are presented to me. And it's never, how do I get enough B12? It's never that question. It's never, how do I get enough plant protein? It's never that question. The question, and I suppose the challenges that are communicated to me the most at these events are ones around friends, family, relationships. How do we navigate the complexity of being vegan in a non-vegan world? How do we navigate the hardship that can be placed on us when we have made a decision to try and reduce violence and exploitation through our lifestyle choices? And this decision isn't because of a personal thing. This isn't because, for us as individuals, we think it would be good if animals weren't being harmed. No, the decision we made isn't based on like a personal preference. It's based on ethics and morals and values. It's not about us, it's about the lives of others, trillions of others. And so when we are around people who are not living in the way that we are, it's not that we're upset that people aren't doing what we're doing. It's not that we're upset that people aren't respecting us necessarily. It's the wider consequence of what their actions are perpetuating. That's what's hard, that's what's challenging, that's what's upsetting. Of course, it hurts us and it hurts our emotions and it hurts our feelings, or affects our emotions and feelings. But the reason that we're upset about having non-vegan friends and family is because these are our loved ones. These are the people we care about, whose actions are most important to us. And by them not being vegan, they are contributing to a system that is so violent, so cruel, so exploitative, is inherently an immoral industry because of the things that happen within it every single day. And then as vegans, what we have to do is we have to navigate this very complex tightrope of having loved ones, people we care about, people we love, who are also engaging in things which are absolutely unspeakably bad, so terrible, so violent, so cruel, not just to animals, but destroying our planet, creating antibiotic-resistant bacteria, creating bird flu and swine flu viruses that could cause the next pandemic, and bird flu is in the news all the time at the moment. And on top of that, we worry about their long-term health. Maybe we have a parent, a father, a mother who has heart problems, who has diabetes, who has issues related to chronic disease, and we know that the consumption of animal products may well be a contributing factor or the reason why. We have to kind of juggle with all of this complexity, all of these problems, and then also accept the flaws in people, accept that these aren't bad people, our parents aren't bad, our friends aren't bad, the people around us aren't necessarily bad just because they engage within these industries, because it's not necessarily their fault. So then as vegans, we have to go, right, how do I navigate this challenge? How do I reconcile the fact that the people I love the most are doing the thing that I am opposing every day through my choices, through my advocacy, through the conversations I'm having, through the work that I'm doing, through my everyday interactions? How do we go home and celebrate Christmas or birthdays or anniversaries or weddings? How do we think about these celebrations and think about them positively when we're at them, watching people eat and gorge on the flesh and secretions of tortured, mutilated, exploited animals and sentient beings? How do we do that? And it is hard, because on the one hand, we feel guilty. We say to ourselves, hey, if I don't speak up, if I don't say something, if I don't make this problem a problem that these people are aware of, that I'm betraying the animals, I'm betraying the victims. So silence feels like a betrayal. It feels like we are a traitor, that we are not doing what we're supposed to be doing, because, look, we're not the victims. Silence is easy for us, but they're the ones, the animals are still suffering. The violence is still being inflicted upon them. So we feel like a betrayal of the values, a betrayal of the victims if we don't say something, but then saying something causes problems. It causes an argument maybe, it causes friction, it causes tension. It can create separations and barriers in these relationships, and we don't want that. We don't want our parents to think of us negatively because when they see us we talk about veganism. We don't want our husbands, wives, partners, children to be worried about being around us because they think we're going to talk about this issue and cause a problem. So then we have to think about how to communicate effectively. It becomes a minefield, doesn't it? And that's the hardship in veganism. That's the thing that we don't necessarily consider when we become vegan. It's the one thing that I'd not really thought about. It's the one thing that I'd not read about, that no one had spoken to me about. It's the one thing about going vegan that I'd not necessarily considered, because I made the change, became confident in that change, and was obviously aware that the people around me weren't necessarily going to agree with me or change just because I'd changed. But then thinking about it and reflecting on it, and the more passionate I became and the more involved I became in this issue, the more those thoughts crept over me. The more I had to challenge myself to find some sense of tranquility, if possible, in this very complex situation that we find ourselves in. Now, one of the questions that was asked to me during one of the book signings, it was in Bologna, this very sweet lady came up to me and she said to me, when you see videos of animals, do you cry? And it really upset me that she asked that question. I said, yes, sometimes I do. But what upset me about that was that it felt like she was asking for validation in a way. She was looking for me to kind of tell her that crying and being upset was okay, that it wasn't an overreaction, that it wasn't abnormal, that actually this was a perfectly valid response to the things that we do. And it really upset me because it made me think about how in society, what we do to animals is so normal, is perpetuated, is legalized. And being vegan is something that's mocked, laughed at, frowned upon, whatever the word may be. And it's become so ingrained, the use and exploitation of animals, that sometimes as vegans we have to question ourselves for feeling sad and crying about this. The fact that this lovely lady would come up to me and would ask me if I cried, I think firstly to gauge whether or not, the sadness it caused me, but also to find a sense of camaraderie, of community, of validation in my response, really upset me. Because how have we got to a point where something so objectively terrible and so objectively upsetting is something that we would doubt ourselves over, or doubt our emotional responses over when we cry over it or get upset over it? I find that really disturbing, because crying and being upset and being distraught by what we do to animals should be the most normal response there is. It should be just the most obvious response there is. We see what's happening to animals and we get upset about it. Now, that upset might manifest into crying or frustration or anger, or maybe just moments of solitude, silence and quiet that we take, as an individual on our own, just to to think through these issues and deal with them internally. Whatever way we process these emotions are the most valid emotions that we should feel, should experience when we consider what we do to animals and we see what we do to animals. And it never fails to touch me when people come up to me and express this to me as if we as a community are still trying to figure out if we are normal for feeling this way, because the world around us tells us that we're not. The world is almost gaslighting us into into trying to convince us that how we feel is abnormal. But how could it be? How could it be abnormal to see injustice and be angry and frustrated and sad and distraught about that? How could that be abnormal? That should be the normal state. But the problem is this injustice is so normal, is so ingrained, is so ubiquitous that we start to question ourselves. Now, I love meeting vegans and having these vegan events, because it reinforces the power of community. Because I think another issue that we face often is this isolation. We go and we see friends and family, we go for a meal, we have an event, we just talk to them, we're just around them, and we can feel alone. I know I'm the only vegan in my family, we might think, and I go home for Christmas or a birthday and I'm the only vegan there, and I feel awkward and I feel like I'm causing a problem. I feel like an inconvenience. Or I go out to my friends, or I go out with my friends, and we have to find a restaurant with a vegan option or a good vegan option, and I just feel like I'm causing problems and it's creating tension and animosity. And then we go, oh, I'm the problem, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And then we internalize that, and we shift the blame onto ourselves, and we shoulder this huge level of responsibility. And what we sometimes lose sight of is that we're not the problem. It's not us. We're not the issue here. Being awkward isn't the problem. What we do to animals is the problem. The negligence, the violence, the willful ignorance, that's the problem. And then, something we do have to face as well is that challenge of going, look, these people around us, our friends, family, the strangers, are not necessarily the problem either. The problem is these industries. The problem is the marketing, the advertisement, the propaganda that is perpetuated day in, day out, that sells us a lie that has been sold to us consistently every single day, that has been forced down our throats, and knives being forced across the throats of animals, perpetuating this lie over and over and over again, telling us that the consumption of animals is healthy, sustainable, and most nefariously of all, ethical, humane, compassionate, justifiable morally, when it is not. So we are especially not the problem. But then what becomes hard often is to not view those around us as being the problem as well. But to go back to the point I was making, in these moments where we feel alone, where we feel isolated, where we feel like we are just an individual, it's so important to recognize that that's not the case. Even if we do have vegan friends, let's say that we don't have a vegan bubble that we can fall back on. Maybe we do feel very alone in our veganism. It's so important to empower ourselves and to recognize that that's not the case. It may be in that moment, but what we represent transcends that moment. It's far greater than just that experience right there in front of us, because what we represent is an ever-growing movement of millions of people who are also beginning to shift, if they have not already, their view towards animals. And they're also beginning, through their choices and through their advocacy and communication, to inspire others to do the same. Now, change, especially societal change, feels slow. It feels like we're slogging it through thick, viscous mud, and we're trying to get through it, and we just can't feel like we're getting anywhere. We're just being dragged under this thick sludge. That's what progress can feel like. But actually, I don't think that's reflective of how things are changing and do change, because progress can feel slow at the time. It's one foot in front of the other, and it feels like it's taken us forever to get anywhere. But when we look back, we can see that a huge amount of distance has been travailed. We have actually walked a long way. Think about what things were like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Things are far better now. Things aren't perfect. We face challenges, we face hardships, we face difficulties, but things are better now. And remember that 5, 10, 15, 20 years is a short amount of time, relatively speaking. Of course, we want this issue to be resolved as quickly as possible, but within the context of time itself, change does happen quickly. Social change happens quickly. And I think vegan change is happening quickly and will continue to happen quickly as technology, as awareness, as social adoption continues to progress as it currently is. And so even in those moments where we feel isolated, alone, where we feel the weight of this issue is a weight that we are solely responsible for, it's important to recognize that that's not the case. And we are supported by millions of people who are also making these changes around us and who have for decades been the trendsetters, the trailblazers in pushing, in pioneering this movement that we are a part of. And we should feel proud of ourselves and pride in our accomplishments and proud of our courage in those moments that are difficult. I've been thinking a lot about this, as you can tell, just because of these conversations and interactions that I've had. And I feel very moved by the people I've met and wanted to discuss some of this with you guys as well, to give you an insight into some of the things I've been thinking and some of the things that I've been discussing recently. And so just to bring it back to my first book, This is Vegan Propaganda, at the end of that book, I talk about family. I talk about these pressures, these challenges. I talk about these interactions and the complexity of them. In fact, the whole last section of the first book is all about sort of the social, cultural, and sort of psychological barriers that push people away from veganism or that make vegan interactions tricky for us as well. And one of the things that I mentioned in the book is how, faced with a situation where I had to debate, numerous dairy farmers or have a conversation about veganism with my mother, I would choose debating dairy farmers. And, it's not an exaggeration. It's not a hyperbole to say that that's the case, because sometimes it's easier, isn't it? I find it easier to talk to a dairy farmer, even though dairy farmers represent, literally they are doing the very thing I'm trying to stop. But I find it easier in a way to debate these people because there is that natural sort of distance from someone that you don't know. There is this kind of, I find it an easier ability to have these complex discussions, to be more challenging, to be more forthright with someone you don't know, especially sort of the physical manifestation of the problem, the farmer themselves. But with parents and with friends, there's all this emotional, I don't want to use the word baggage necessarily, that sounds negative. Baggage may work as a word, but I don't mean it necessarily just in a negative way. There is just more emotion involved. There's more tension involved. There's more at stake, really, because, we see these people more consistently. We have these more intimate relationships with them, obviously. They know more about us. We know more about them. And so there is obviously going to be a little bit more heightened emotion or more at stake in these conversations. Or at least that's my personal experience. Not wanting to generalize, but that's how I feel about it. So I do talk a little bit about that in my first book, and discuss, sort of friends and family in my second book as well. But yeah, I'll bring this video to an end now because I've been rambling for a little while. And what I would love is for you guys to tell me down in the comments what your experiences have been like, positive and negative, because I know there are lots of negative experiences. I've heard horror stories of parents putting meat in a vegan's dinner. I've heard of friends being so awful and just mocking and tormenting a vegan. I've heard all these very negative stories, and please do share them down below if you're looking for sort of people to validate those experiences, and because it's important to share these things within our community as well. But I also want to hear positive experiences. Maybe you went vegan and you spoke to your mother and she went vegan on the spot. Maybe you have a sibling and you went vegan together, or a wife or a husband or a partner and you made this transition together. I would love to hear those positive, inspiring stories as well, because they are so important and they keep us grounded and show us that even though these conversations can be the most difficult, actually with patience, perseverance, and sometimes with just a little bit of time, even those who may seem most staunchly against veganism can soften and even become vegan themselves. And those stories are ones that fill us with hope and optimism and a sense of determination for the future. Because here's an important thing to recognize. I said before that this shift is happening, and it is. But it's also important for us to recognize that this shift isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to be many, many years, especially before we see, the complete eradication of everything that we would like to see eradicated. And look, let's be honest, probably is not going to happen in the way that we want within our lifetimes. I think there will be huge changes in terms of the elimination of animal farming, of animal testing, of things like circuses and aquariums and such. We will see huge positive strides within our lifetimes for these issues, but I don't think we will eliminate the entire problem within our lifetimes. And what that means is that we have to remain positive. We have to remain determined, probably for the rest of our lives. What we don't want to do is become so pessimistic and hopeless that we find ourselves becoming apathetic or filled with despair. We have to find that balance, that sense of urgency to keep us going, to keep us talking, to keep us advocating for this movement, but also a sense of positivity and optimism so that when we do get up, we don't feel consumed by negativity and consumed by the hardships of this issue. And we can find balance in our everyday lives and also balance, I suppose, through that long-termism, that future thinking as well. And that's something that I try and do as much as possible. Some days it's easier than others. Some days it feels like everything is going great, and some days it feels quite the opposite, doesn't it? But balance is important, and I think a sense of optimism for the future, which we should all have because there are plenty of reasons to be optimistic for the future. Well, I think that mindset is a very important one for us to carry through every single day, even in those moments where we may feel alone and where the hardships of veganism may feel most prevalent. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. Let me know if you liked this style of video. Informal, a little bit more rambly, a little bit more chatty, but I'd love to know if you enjoyed it. And if you did, I'll be sure to make more of them in the future. All right, guys, let me know down below in the comments what your experiences are. Thank you so much for watching this video. And a huge thank you to Wild as well for partnering with me in this video. All right, speak to you all soon. And thanks again for all of your support throughout the years. I appreciate it so much.